Hello and welcome. I'm your host, author Ryan M. Oliver, and this is the Mighty Books Podcast. This episode's featured author is Ronald Lamont Canfield. Ronald Lamont Canfield is a Pacific Northwest author residing in the Puget Sound area of the state of Washington. His novels are written under the pen name Ronald Lamont, while his screenplays and short stories are under his full name, Ronald Lamont Canfield. Ronald is a U.S. Navy veteran and former retired high-level manager with the Department of Defense. His debut novel, Risen from the Depths, drew on his experiences therein. His subsequent novels, Smoke and Mirrors, Fate's Intervention, and Postmortem Narrative, a follow-up to Smoke and Mirrors, take the reader on a journey along the shores of the Pacific Northwest. Ronald's latest endeavor has been writing award-winning screenplays based on these three novels. His most recent is a short film screenplay based on his award-winning short story, Life's Reflections, A Fateful Weekend. When not extracting notions from the recesses of his imagination and imparting them upon the pages of a book or script, Ronald is actively involved in fitness and the community. Hello, everybody. Welcome again to another episode of the Mighty Books Podcast. Today with me, I have Ronald Lamont Canfield. Ron, how are you doing today?
Doing great, thanks.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. So we're here to talk about your works as an author. Can you talk about your books a little bit, the titles for start?
Sure. There are four of them that I have published. We're going to kind of focus on the three that take place in the Pacific Northwest and a little bit about why we're focusing on those three. Number one, my novel Fate's Intervention happens to take place in Gig Harbor. And so, us being part of the Gig Harbor literary group,
yeah,
figured it'd be nice to kind of point that out. I have a funny story about a book signing that I had in regard to that book that we can get to if you want. The other two books that also take place in the Pacific Northwest, the reason we're talking about two of those is, for one, my newest book, Postmortem Narrative, is a follow-up to Smoke and Mirrors. And so, so if readers want to read Postmortem Narrative, they have to read Smoke and Mirrors first. That encompasses the three books that take place in the Pacific Northwest. All mysteries, by the way.
Nice. So what got you into mystery?
It's just been a genre that has always intrigued me. I'm one of those people that, and there are probably a lot of you out there, that enjoy a really good mystery, whether it's a book, a television show, a feature film, whatever. And I'm also one of those that, tries to figure out the whodunit as the mystery is unfolding. And so one thing there is, what I greatly dislike are two things. One is if it's way too easy to figure out. It's like, well, come on, you just wasted some of my time, Yep. Or if the writer, be a book or a script, purposely holds back information and just to have a surprise reveal at the end. And it's like, come on, yeah. You didn't give us anything. And so what I always liked is the type of mystery where when, the killer, if it's a murder mystery, is revealed at the end, you go, oh, and then you can go back and see these little nuggets that they had planted along the way that seemed innocuous, and now you realize that they were important clues to the mystery, but they did it well enough that you didn't necessarily pick up on them. So That's kind of how I always like to write, because that's what I love in a really good mystery.
So it very, very much almost, I can't say quite interactive, but you can play along, you can follow along with the detectives, who are solving the mysteries. You can make those, little string maps in your mind of who actually did do it. So that's a good way to do it.
Yeah.
So about your books, are they all murder mystery? Are there some paranormal aspects to it? What are they kind of, I would say, about in a nutshell?
Well, all four of them are murder mysteries. coming up with a different way each time to, kind of plant the seeds and or red herrings, and then basically try to shock the reader or the viewer for my screenplays. That's the tricky part is, you don't want to be redundant. It's like, oh, well, that's how he tried to use sleight of hand this last time. And so, yeah, coming up with a totally different way each time, it's a bit of work, but it's also, pretty fun. It's like, oh, what new thing can I come up with this
Mhm.
time to, shock the reader or throw them for a loop or whatever the case may be.
Do you tend to, is it all just solo work, or do you bounce ideas off with like particular people?
It's mostly solo work. I do have some people that, once I'm done with either the first draft or kind of I wouldn't call it a second draft, but I go through the process and I'll have once I get the first draft done, then I actually go back to the beginning and go through the whole thing from word one, making sure that I like it, looking for, making sure that continuity is there, making sure that I didn't, put something out there that was supposed to be revealed later or whatever the case may be. And I have a bunch of processes to try to prevent that from the beginning. But once I'm really happy with it,
Yeah.
then I have some friends and then my brother, who's actually happens to be a screenwriter,
All right.
and I will send them to them for feedback.
Okay.
And, both, big picture, did you like it or not? But also, feel free to give me some, brutally honest feedback if I need to make a tweak here or there, or if I somehow missed something in the storyline that I didn't catch on my going through the draft process, then that they can, point that out and I can go fix that. So
Well, that's good. Yeah. Everyone's got to have a good process. That helps it streamline it a little bit as you get better and better at writing your stories too.
yes.
Yes. So you've got this huge gaggle of work already done. Are there going to be more books coming up in the future? Or you did mention screenplays.
Right. And that is my total focus right now. So I have three of my books, ironically, the three that take place in the Pacific Northwest. I have written screenplays based on them. And all three of the screenplays have received awards at Los Angeles area film festival screenwriting competitions.
Wow, that's awesome.
So yeah, that's been a real nice, I guess I would call it a surprise. Basically a first-time screenwriter puts his work out there, and all three have received awards. In fact, the Los Angeles Cinefest Film Festival, and I entered Fate's Intervention, the one that takes place in Gig Harbor,
Okay.
into that screenwriting competition. And not only was it an official selection for last year's, exactly a year ago, as a matter of fact, film festival, that they subsequently invited me to be a guest judge at this year's film festival.
Wow, what an honor. That's awesome.
Yeah, so that was pretty cool and exhausting.
I can imagine. I can imagine. How long did it take you to get through all the candidates and everything?
Oh, well, so they send me the first batch. Yeah, luckily, they send you access to all of the films, and in some cases were screenplays as well. And so the first batch, I think, was about 55 uh, films, mostly short films, thank goodness, with a small smattering of screenplays and even some music videos, which I didn't realize that was part of their film festival, is that you could enter a music video. But and so that one was about a month or two of work to go through all of those. And basically, the process, so they have a grading system, and you give it a 1 through 10 grade on all aspects of the process, the originality, creativity, production value, acting, all of that stuff. And then you give it an overall grade, and then you give it a overall recommendation for the film festival, i.e., hey, this is award worthy in my opinion, or this is it may not be award worthy, but it's definitely worthy of being part of the festival.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of films, if you've been to film festivals at all, that are definitely entertaining, but you're not necessarily going to say, well, that's a top award winner. It
Right.
may not be an award winner, but it was an entertaining film.
Right.
And then you've got the maybe. And so for that, for someone like me, a guest judge, it's like, well, it was kind of okay, but I don't want to have the final say. Someone with more experience should, say, yes, this should be in the festival, or no, it's not quite up to that level. And then there are ones that are pass, and
Mhm.
those are usually really bad. So from any number, the story could be horrible, the production value that, it's, yeah, all over the map. And
Oh, sure.
so the majority are actually fall into the pass category, because with a film festival, if you've got the money to enter the festival, then you can put your work out there.
It's
So they get a lot of substandard, I should say, work there.
yeah, it's worth it to them to put some good time, effort, creativity, money into it if they've got it. That way, they can actually maybe make a reputation for themselves. So, can you elaborate a little bit? So, you went from novel writing to screenplay writing. How did you make the transition? And B, what are the differences between writing novels versus writing screenplays?
Yeah, the differences are huge. And ironically, I actually went screenplay to novel back to screenplay.
Oh, really?
So what I mean by that is, as I mentioned, my brother's a screenwriter, and his most recent, if anyone saw the film The Virtuoso, it came out, I think, about a year ago or so,
Okay.
starring Anthony Hopkins. That was one of his.
Ooh.
But he hasn't been able to get a whole lot of work, but he has, gotten work and gotten feature films, and he's done some short films that did well in festivals back in the day. He's doing the 9 to 5 thing these days, so he doesn't have anything new coming out. But anyway, so he would send me his scripts, just, hey, how about reading this, see what you think, you got some ideas. And often he would say, and I need more stuff. This is supposed to be a feature film, and I've got my story arc and everything in there, but I only have about an hour's worth, or hour and 15 minutes worth of stuff. And so you got some ideas. And I found that I could read through the script and immediately see areas that were just begging to delve into more.
Yeah.
And I would get back to him and say, well, what about this? And you could take this, and then go off on this little tangent, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a dead end. You can actually go full circle back to where you're taking the story at the end. And he's like,
Right.
oh, perfect. So after several times of kind of that process, I eventually, instead of just saying, well, you could do this, you could do that, I just ended up writing pages of script right into his script,
Right.
highlighted it all in red font and font color, and then would send it to him. Says, well, what about this? And
Yeah.
so after doing that, I thought, maybe I kind of have a knack for writing. And then the other piece of that, so that was kind of got me into, being familiar with how screenplays were written, and how I could come up with ideas and be able to write some on my own. But also in my title was nuclear chief test engineer,
Oh,
which is a whole different story.
yeah.
But the bottom line with that position is I wrote a lot of official correspondence with headquarters back in Washington, D.C. And what I found was that even though all of that correspondence was technical in nature, but I found that I had an ability to write the story behind why we want to go take this technical action.
Right.
And so I found that I was something of a storyteller, insofar as that goes. In fact, my coworkers used to tease me about that. Kind of like the Ron could sell freezers to Eskimos kind of joke, right?
Oh, yeah.
Um, so anyway, I had been watching the television series NCIS, and I had actually never watched it up until I started seeing reruns.
Right.
and I enjoyed the storylines and stuff. And I thought, well, with my background, I think I could come up with a storyline that they've never seen, which is pretty ironic with a TV series that has like 400 episodes, being able to
Okay.
come up with something totally new and unique. So my brother said, "Yeah, you should write that." And so I wrote this teleplay for as an NCIS episode, and we actually were able to contact the writing group for Belisarius, which is who produces
Yes.
NCIS. Pitched the concept. They're like, "Oh yeah, that sounds good. Have your agent send it to us because pretty much no one accepts unsolicited work." Well, we didn't have an agent. We couldn't get an agent, and so
Oh,
so from that point, so from my little idea for an NCIS episode, my brother says, "Well, maybe you should just turn this into a novel. It's a really unique storyline, and 100,000 times more novels are published every year than scripts are produced, right?
right.
So,
Right.
and especially in this day and age, it's like, with self-publishing and everything. So you can at least get your work out there, even if it's just your own. So I
Yeah.
took that storyline idea, turned that into my debut novel. And so that was the first one that got published.
Very cool.
So anyway, so
Yeah.
I've kind of come full circle. So from my first little teleplay that I wrote became novels, and then I focused on novels for the next several years. And then just over the last year and a half was when I decided, to start writing screenplays based on my novels.
So like from a because I've written novels, but definitely not screenplays. So if you were to what is like the format? Is the format just completely different than writing a novel?
Oh yeah, totally different. So the first thing you need to do is get screenwriting software.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
And then for anyone out there that wants to kind of delve into that, you can go online and find a bunch of produced screenplays, because the key is you want to go in and read some screenplays so that you can understand the format and how they're written and what everything means. And and of course there are tutorials and stuff like that, but for me, I would just start with go find a really good screenplay that interests you, like I have the Shawshank Redemption screenplay, for
Oh,
example.
that's a good one.
And so yeah, and that one's it's interesting because not just being to me one of the best written screenplays ever, but you get to see the dynamic of the voiceover. It's a narrative, the Morgan Freeman character
Yeah.
narratives. So you get voiceover and then the action, and all of the different dialogue and all of that. So you could get a feel for that process as the intermix of voiceover with dialogue and action and all of the typical stuff that you see in a screenplay.
Right.
And then the other thing is a screenplay is about 1/50th of the volume of a novel. So you got to figure out how to take your, big, either 50,000 word novella, which is what my Fate's Intervention book is, which was the first one that I decided to adapt to a screenplay, just because the volume was much less than Smoke and Mirrors and Postmortem Narrative, because they're 90,000 word novels, and be able to condense it down without losing what the story is.
Yeah.
So you have to get rid of a lot of stuff out of your book
Hmm.
without sacrificing the intent of the
Yeah.
story and
Yeah.
all of that kind of thing.
Yeah, because like I know you do a lot of scene building, obviously world building in novels, but because the screenplay is meant for film and visual, that becomes I want to say the world building is you're actually seeing them interact. Now you're only writing for their dialogue to maybe a couple actions is what at least I can interpret it as being. That's why it's a lot shorter than a novel.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Way shorter.
Yeah.
Especially by word count, and I've never done a word count comparison, but it's hugely different.
I can imagine, especially if it's mostly just dialogue and a couple other things. I mean, that's a lot of mine is just it's the actions acting up. No one's talking, they're fighting, they're not necessarily doing anything. It's like these guys fight. Cool. And now we're moving on to the next one.
Yeah, you actually get more detailed than that,
Oh, good.
and every scene has a scene heading.
Every scene.
So exterior home, interior home, um, exterior neighborhood or exterior, downtown Seattle or something like that.
Right.
And so every single scene has a heading, and then you have, the action, and the action could be, almost as in depth as what you would have in a novel if you're writing like a fight scene or a love scene or
Right.
something like that. But generally, the action is a couple sentences or so,
Okay.
and then you have the character and then the dialogue. Yeah, it's a real interesting process. Real
It sounds like
interesting
it.
process.
It sounds like, especially having to change your mind over from super in depth to a different kind of in depth. You have to express it in a different way.
Right. Yeah. For me, the way when I'm writing a screenplay, I write it from the perspective of I'm watching this on the big screen.
Right.
And so I need to convey this to the viewer.
Yes.
And so it's a little bit different than when you're writing a scene in a novel that you typically get more in depth because you're trying to take words and make a visual.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a really interesting, different process. And I'll tell you, people that write screenplays based on someone else's work, that's got to be so hard, because at least the upside of when you're writing it based on your own work is where the story's going and what's really important and what can be left out.
Right.
And then of course the other thing just from the writing process is you go back to your Word document manuscript and copy paste for the dialogue or a specific action or something like that.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And then the other thing that you have to remember to do is if you're writing a screenplay based on your own work, is that you can change things.
Yeah.
In fact, you're going to have to change things to make it all fit within the much smaller, volume of the screenplay. And so sometimes I forget that. It's like, I can't, oh wait, oh yeah, I can, this is my work. So I can change, how the scene happens.
Yeah.
And so that came in real handy for Smoke and Mirrors, because I had this one part where I was struggling with transitioning from one scene to the next, and it's like, wait a minute, I can totally change this.
Yeah.
It's my work. So
that's nice. A little more creative freedom that way. So now you write under a pseudonym, yes?
Well, sort of, yeah.
Sort kind of.
My novels are under Ronald Lamont, which is just my first and middle name.
Right.
And my screenplays are under my full name, Ronald Lamont Canfield.
What made you want to do that versus just doing your full name?
Well, for novels, that just seemed like just too long.
Oh, okay. Okay. That makes sense.
On the book cover.
Yeah.
Ronald Lamont Canfield. So it just seemed easier to just go first and middle name. But with a screenplay, I really needed to make sure that they know that it's me. With a script, you don't really want to use a pseudonym for a script.
Oh, sure. Yeah, not particularly.
Especially, you registered through the Writers Guild or whatever the case may be, and so it's got to be,
legitimate.
Yeah,
It's gonna be easy to find you. Now, do you want all your books to stand on their own? I know two of them are intertwined. Is the
correct.
series based on like a one main like detective or character, and then they just have different stories that happen to that person, or are they kind of all interconnected?
Yeah, so 3 of the books are standalone, and then so Smoke and Mirrors, which is my first book with homicide detective Mackenzie Nash, which takes place in the fictionalized version of Kitsap County for the most part. There's some scenes that go elsewhere. like Seattle and Key Peninsula and stuff like that.
Nice.
So that one, as part of introducing her backstory in Smoke and Mirrors, when I later had just some ideas for another novel, and I realized that there was a piece of her backstory that would fit really well with a follow-up novel. In other words, so here I introduced this part of her backstory, and then that could become, an important piece in a totally different story. So postmortem narrative is a totally different story, with the exception of this one little piece that got introduced in Smoke and Mirrors that now plays a role, which becomes a much larger role than one would expect in this follow-up.
Nice.
So the case is different, but there's this one tie that, when it's revealed, you're like, holy. Yeah.
It knocks.
So that was really fun to write. And then the whole beginning to postmortem narrative was really, really fun to write, because I made it happen the weekend of Halloween. And so you get to introduce people dressed up in costume that ends up, being an alleged perpetrator, but they're in disguise.
Yeah.
And so it makes things a little trickier for the investigators.
Yeah. Everyone's covered up. They can't exactly not everyone's supposed to be in costume. No, that's Halloween. Everyone's in costume.
Right. Yeah.
That's the whole point.
So that was kind of fun.
Awesome. So when it comes to sitting down and actually doing your novel or your screenplays, do you do a fair amount of research, or is it just all from the old noodle there?
Yeah, it kind of depends on what I'm doing with the story itself.
Yeah.
Mostly it's from my own noodle. Where research comes into play is I'm someone who, just has to be technically accurate on everything. And so that's where the research comes in, is if I need to be technical about something. Like, for example, in my first novel, and the medical examiner is saying, what this guy died from. So I knew what I wanted it to look like, but I didn't know the proper term, so I had to do some research and discovered, atlanto-occipital dislocation, which is basically a whiplash. But yeah, and so, so little things like that. The first book takes place in San Diego, and so I wanted to be technically accurate on, even though I know San Diego really well, having done some, work there.
Right.
But technically accurate on all of the little, where I wanted the fishing trawler to tie up. I needed an exact location for that.
Right.
And, and there's a scene where someone's driving from, one of the characters is driving from El Cajon to Old Town San Diego, and they think they're being followed. And so I actually needed to go on, like Google Maps or MapQuest or whatever the heck, and pick a path that I wanted to. So if you're reading the novel and she pulls into a gas station, there's actually a gas station there, so, little things, goofy things like that. So that's usually the extent of research. Either I need something to be technically accurate,
right,
or if I'm getting super detailed about a specific location.
Right. Because you said you do a fictional part of Kitsap County. You don't like have a street map of, Kitsap County going, all right, we're going to go exactly here on the map, but maybe you do a little bit.
Yeah, for the most part, the main reason I went fictional with that one, there's actually two reasons. One is because when I wrote the first one that takes place in San Diego, and I had to do so much research to be technically accurate on everything, it's like, okay, I don't want to have to do that again. But the main reason was that I loved the idea of a murder mystery taking place in Slaughter County. And that's the original name of Kitsap County.
It sure is. They even have bars and restaurants after that name, I think.
Right.
Even around here. So that's awesome.
Yeah, so I thought that would be kind of fun. And so with those two novels, everything that's within Kitsap County, I gave a different name.
Okay.
like Silver City instead of Silverdale, and Scandia instead of Paulsbo,
Oh,
um,
okay.
Port Sydney instead of Port Orchard, because
Oh, okay.
Sydney was the original name of Port Orchard.
Oh, really? Okay.
And then even some of the local establishments, like if locals are probably familiar with the Boat Shed restaurant. Well,
Mhm.
in the book, it's called the Boathouse Grill. So basically, locals could definitely get their bearings.
Right.
But then, even if you're not local to Kitsap County, I kept everything outside of Kitsap the same. So
Yeah.
Seattle is Seattle, Tacoma's Tacoma, Key Peninsula, all of those things.
Right. 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 Right.
So and I visualized certain areas where things happened, but I didn't get into super detail.
You're more focused on the actual story and the progression of that versus the geography.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, that's what we would want. We want to know what's happening with the characters, not necessarily what's happening in, 3 streets over. We want to know
Yeah.
what's going on with them.
Now,
Yes,
face intervention that takes place in Gig Harbor, I did have to do a little bit of research on specific location, because that one, takes place in Gig Harbor, and the Tacoma Narrows Bridge plays a role, and the chapel at Echo Bay, Fox Island, plays a role.
okay, okay,
And so those, I did a little more, just, making sure I'm calling out proper locations because it's taking place in a specific
yeah,
place.
yeah. I like that kind of blend of fiction and nonfiction. That I don't know. It helps the local readers especially kind of
Yeah.
have a little tie to it, but it's not so close to home. You know what I'm saying? That it's like so realistic. Did this actually happen, or is this a work of fiction? So
Right.
thankfully, it's
Yeah.
just work of fiction.
Yeah.
Um,
So I mentioned earlier about a book signing that I had
oh yeah,
in support of face intervention.
yeah.
So kind of a funny story there. The book and the screenplay open with a newspaper article about an apparent murder suicide at the chapel on Echo Bay. And that's on a certain date. And then in the book, when you turn the page to actual chapter 1 of the book, it's like 11 days earlier at the Gig Harbor Police Station. In the screenplay, it's like 5 days earlier because I
Okay.
condensed it. And in the screenplay, I didn't put a newspaper article up on the screen. I actually had dialogue between the main character and his wife, on a Saturday morning, and she's reading the paper while he's drinking coffee, and she's like, "Oh my God, did you
Yeah.
hear about this?" And he heard about it because he's the cop, he's the lead character, and his partner and he had actually been the first on the scene,
Hmm.
and then they turned it over to the sheriff's department afterward. So,
Right.
but anyways, so I had been to the chapel on Echo Bay before for a wedding, and I knew that they, held a lot of venues. They do concerts and all that kind of stuff. Well, anyway, I contacted them and I said, hey, I have this book that comes out, takes place in Gig Harbor. Part of it takes place right here at your chapel. Wondering if you'd be interested in, me holding a book signing here, and 100% of the proceeds would go to the Chapel Preservation Fund.
Nice.
And they're like, "Oh yeah, that sounds great." And I said, "Well, before you say okay, what happens at the chapel is not necessarily good."
Yeah.
And they're like, "Oh yeah, we know it's a book, it's just a story, we're
Right.
we're okay with that." So I go set up for the book signing, and in the area that I set up, I had two crime scene chalk victim outlines and the yellow crime scene tape set up right next to where I was to do the
Yeah.
signing. So that was pretty funny.
Yeah. I want. What was the reaction? People seeing that? That just
They
the.
loved it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so really good turnout. We raised about 370 $400, something like that, for the chapel's preservation fund.
Awesome.
So
That's great.
yeah, so that was tons of fun.
That's great. I love hearing that stuff. Real quick on when you're doing your works, are you an avid reader while you're working, or are you just like, I'm only working on this works, I'm not going to read anybody else's stuff while I'm focusing on writing my own?
Yeah, definitely the latter.
Yeah.
And for two reasons. One is I don't want to be reading someone else's work and then have something in there, kind of potentially contaminate what I'm doing. In other
Sure.
words, I don't want to get an idea from someone else that impacts what I'm doing with my work.
Makes sense.
And but the main reason is if I'm writing, that's all I want to do.
Right.
And so I will literally write from pretty much right after lunch until about midnight every night.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah,
That's
and I'll
incredible.
take little breaks, here and there, but for
Sure.
the most part, because I just get on a roll, and it's almost like the story itself is taken over, and I'm just there along for the ride.
Yeah. You're just the translator at that point. You're
Yeah,
taking
yeah,
the space dust flying in your head and you're putting it to words.
yeah,
Yeah. I love getting in the groove. I love when that happens. It just
yeah,
time just melts away. Like I've only been doing this for 2 hours. You look over, I've been doing this for half the day. I
yes,
love when that happens.
yeah.
For me, it's rarer and rarer just because of, busy time, young kids that, but when I can get in, it's so rewarding to see what
Yeah.
you've done in that amount of time.
Yeah, I have the good fortune of being retired, so I can I can
Yeah.
do that.
Yep.
Just write and write and write.
I can't wait. I got a while to go, but I try to put it in there anytime I get a chance. So I try to get something done. What does literary success look like to you?
Yeah, for me it's very simple. People are entertained by my work. That's it.
I like it. Nice
Yeah.
nutshell.
Yep, whether it's a book or a film. If they're entertained, that's
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 the
the
end of
whole
the day
reason
for you.
I'm there. I mean, I'm entertained, obviously that's number one. That's I'm entertained with the crazy stuff I come up with.
Yeah.
But that would be just for me. But as far as putting my work out there, if others are entertained, that's it. There's no, monetary success, no, awards or anything like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I enter my screenplays into screenwriting competitions only to, hopefully get my work recognized
Yeah.
so that, I can go from screenplay to, to the big screen ideally. So, either that or win the, Mega Millions or Powerball and produce my own film. But
I think that'd be really
outside of
fun.
that,
Yeah, yeah. It might not be a huge amount of, chance that happening, but that'd be really
yeah,
cool. Yeah, no, that's my thing with writing anything. If you're not doing it for yourself, whether it be for your mental health, your entertainment, to like you said, entertain others around you, really shouldn't have no business doing any writing because that's what you get the joy out of it. Other people
right,
feel that when they read your work, and I think that's what it's about. This is entertainment. This is art. This is
right, exactly. Yeah.
so that's awesome. Um, and so lastly, so where can we as readers can get a copy of your book and maybe even screenplays, read some screenplays? Where can we read all these things?
Yes. So as far as my books go, you can get them pretty much everywhere. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, allegedly Walmart. Then also any local bookstore. They may not have them on the shelves, but you go in and say, hey, can you order in, Smoke and Mirrors and Postmortem Narrative or Fate's Intervention, and they can order it in.
And then your screenplays, are those up for public to read, or are they hopefully be made into films
Yeah,
in the future?
yeah. Right now, they're not up for public to read. My newest screenplay is actually for a short film. That one I'm going to get made come hell or high water. I've actually had discussions with a local being Seattle area production company,
Heck yeah.
and interestingly enough, their production thus far has been mostly like get hired for promotional type films.
Okay.
And so most of those are like 4 minutes or less in length. But they have done some longer ones, but their production value is just off the charts.
Oh,
Which
really?
is the whole reason I reached out to them and I said, hey, have you ever considered doing like a short film and putting it out there to film festivals. And so we had a real nice talk. I sent them the script. They absolutely loved the script. So right now we're kind of working through, hopefully making that happen.
That's awesome. I would love to hear more about that when you
When it
make
happens.
that happen. Yes, I want to hear more about that when it happens.
Yeah. Because the beauty of a short film is, it doesn't have a huge, $1, $2, $5, $10 million cost to produce it.
Well, and murder mystery too, you don't have to make it this gigantic, over the top, costly thing. It's really about the genuine conversations, the story itself. Yeah, having some good visuals, prop, whatever, however they do it, is important, but you're not doing this huge CGI thing that costs millions and millions of dollars.
Right. Yeah. It's more about the story,
Yeah.
and not the action.
Yeah.
In murder mysteries. So yeah,
Right.
they're not a high dollar, $40 million film kind of thing.
What would be a short film timeline, or I guess 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half hour?
Yeah, it's probably about 15 minutes or so. Yeah, for those that aren't familiar with screenplay versus film time, it's 1 minute per page. So if you have a 120-page screenplay, figure 2 hours.
Wow. Okay.
My short film script is 17 pages, which one would think would, equate to 17-minute film. But a lot of that in there is information. So it'll probably be closer to 14, 15 minutes. Not that that's, a big difference, but
right.
Just so ballpark about a 15-minute film.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. I was like, I don't know, half a movie, about a half hour, 45 minutes. I don't know. Okay.
Well, yeah. Well, and they can vary. Having viewed a lot of those short films for the, as a guest judge,
right.
Yeah, they anywhere from a few minutes to like 45 minutes. But ideally, you kind of want to keep it in that 15, maybe no more than 20-minute range if you're trying to make a film and get it to film festivals.
Right.
And I mean, you pay the money, they're gonna view it.
Yeah.
But you want to kind of get into that sweet spot if at all possible.
Well, awesome. Ron, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy writing schedule and screenwriting schedule to come and talk with me. I really appreciate it. And
Sure, my pleasure.
And then one more time, where can we find your books?
They just, go to Amazon or Barnes and Noble, or like I said, any bookstore, and type in Ronald Lamont. Then it'll take you right to my author page, or at least for Amazon, I have an author page. So it'll take you right to my author page, and it'll have all 4 of my novels there. The one we didn't talk about, just a real brief thing, if people are interested in a book with a U.S. Navy NCIS type of theme to it, that's what the debut book is all about.
Well, great, Ron. This has been so fun. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Sure. Anytime.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thanks so much for your time. I hope you enjoyed this, and go buy his books. They sound fascinating. I want to get on it myself. So, all right, everyone, take care. Have a great day. Are you an author? Do you know someone who is? If so, then message me, Ryan Oliver, at ryanmoliver.com to set up a free appointment to discuss being showcased on the Mighty Books podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to the Mighty Books YouTube channel and share the link to this and more episodes with your friends and family. Thanks for listening. So long for now. Stay mighty and keep reading.